Mr. President.
The chair recognizes the senator from Missouri.
Mr. President, I'd like to call up my amendment number 1058 and ask that it be reported by number.
The clerk will report.
The senator from Missouri, Mr. Hawley, proposes an amendment number 1058.
Mr. President, I ask for 6 minutes of debate prior to the roll call vote.
Without objection.
Mr. President, for 50 years, the federal government has put into the water, into the soil, into the air of St. Louis and surrounding regions radioactive nuclear material. They have not told the people of St. Louis. They have not compensated the people of St. Louis. They have not helped the people of St. Louis. In fact, just the opposite. For decades, they told the people of St. Louis, no problem. There's no problem here. Meanwhile, children were dying of cancer. People all over the region contracting autoimmune diseases. Why? Because the groundwater has been poisoned, because the creeks where they played in have been poisoned. And now we know for a fact the government has covered it up for decades. Mr. President, it is time to make this right. The amendment we are about to vote on is a very simple amendment. It is about basic justice, compensating the victims of the federal government's negligence for what the government itself has done. And it hasn't only happened in Missouri. It's happened around the country, which is why this amendment would reauthorize a victims fund for those who have suffered because of the government's negligence. And by suffered, I mean gotten sick and had family members die. In Missouri, in states across the country, it reauthorizes it, and it makes it available to those who have been the victims of what the government has done. This is a bipartisan bill. I am proud to have worked with Senator Lujan, Senator Crapo, Senator Schmidt, and others. And now I'd like to recognize the senator from New Mexico, Senator Lujan.
Mr. President.
So, oh my God, the distinguished gentleman from New Mexico.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I want to commend Mr. Hawley and Mr. Crapo for the work they've done here, and all of our colleagues and staff that have contributed to telling this story, and the support that I expect to see today, and that I hope we will get this across the finish line. Almost 80 years ago, New Mexico became ground zero for the detonation of the first nuclear bomb. Millions of people across the country traveled to theaters this weekend, and they saw a blockbuster centered around this infamous day. But not enough people have focused on the collateral damage caused by our nation's nuclear weapons testing. People that sacrificed on behalf of our country for national security purposes, working day in and day out in states like Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, Missouri, Wyoming, South Dakota, Nevada, Texas, Oregon, North Dakota, Idaho, Utah, Montana, and others. They deserve our support. Folks have traveled to Washington with lung cancer, oral cancer, asthma, heart problems, begging us to extend and expand the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. A few years ago, an elder from the Navajo Nation traveled here to testify, and she looked us all in the eye, and she asked a simple question. Are you waiting for us all to die for the problem to go away? I ask this body to show these victims compassion, understand their pain and suffering, so that they know it's not gone unnoticed. I respectfully ask for your vote. I yield back.
Mr. President.
The senator from Idaho.
Thank you, Mr. President. When America conducted nuclear tests in Nevada, New Mexico, and the Pacific, we had little understanding of how radiation spread. Throughout my time in Congress, I've advocated for expanding the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act to cover the forgotten victims of these tests, including the residents of all the affected states that have been identified here today. Downwinders, those affected by these tests, deserve to be compensated for the effects of these weapons. I'm grateful for working with Senator Lujan and Senator Hawley and our other colleagues to ensure that we do not leave our downwinders behind.
Mr. President.
The chair, the senator from Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of this amendment, and I'm proud to work on it with my colleague from Missouri and others in a bipartisan way to provide some relief for the people who have been affected by this. And here in Missouri, I can tell you, I'm couple of weeks ago, I gave my maiden speech, and I talked a lot about where I grew up. And I grew up in a blue-collar town in the shadow of the airport in Bridgeton. And that is the epicenter of where this happened. Near the airport, near a landfill, in those areas in the city and in North County, people work hard. They always have. And little did they know that this hazardous toxic waste was being dumped in their water, on the ground, where their children play. And all this amendment does is reauthorize something that's been on the books for decades and allows people who have been affected to apply. So I'm proud to support the people who've been affected who are looking for some measure of justice. Nothing will make them whole, but this is a step. And I'm proud to work with my colleagues in that regard, too. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield back.
Mr. President, I would request the ayes and nays.